Are your players walking into each room of your dungeon and just rolling initiative, and you're looking for ways to make your dungeon more exciting? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. See you after the intro.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Welcome back to Dungeon Brew. Today we're going to be talking about dungeon creation and how to make those dungeons exciting and unforgettable for the players around the table. And I want to start by setting a scene for you. Let's say that your players have spent weeks tracking a notorious necromancer through a mountain range, and they finally corner him in an ancient temple that's built in the side of the mountain. They go inside and they start moving across this temple floor where there's a massive mosaic that's depicting an ancient ritual that was done centuries ago. And as they move across it, their footsteps start to trigger these ghostly whispers, and you start hearing the echoes of the sacrifices that have been taking place throughout the time in which this temple has existed. And they come to learn that the necromancer isn't just waiting for them, but he's actually in mid-ritual. And as they step on these different areas of the floor, it is actually disrupting the ritual that he is casting on another floor, and it's preventing him from using the temple's latent magical energy. So what makes an encounter like this stick? There's a number of different things that help you build something that's more than just a combat challenge against a BBEG. You want to look at the environment, you want to look at the stakes, you want to think about the villain's motivations, and you want to weave all these together so that there's something meaningful that is taking place. Months later, you may find that your players can't forget this temple they went into, where they all had to position themselves in a particular way to really be impactful to weaken the necromancer to truly fight him. And so they keep talking about that whispering floor that they had to walk across. This is the crux of what we're talking about today. It's where you aren't just going into an encounter and looking at depleting the hit points around the battlefield. Instead, you've created a moment where the players are having to lean forward and be fully immersed within the world that you have shared with them. You are creating an encounter that has built tension, it's encouraging teamwork, and you've used story elements to create a situation that your players can actually tell for years when they're outside of the game. So I want to talk about how we build these memorable moments specifically within a dungeon environment. And we're going to start with one of the most overlooked aspects, which I've talked about in other videos, and that's looking at the environment for your encounter design. We can't forget that the environment is a tool. When the players enter a room, the environment should tell them what happened there, and it might tell them what's going to happen next. Consider having them go into a room in a dungeon that's just a simple goblin post. Sure, you could just describe the room with a few goblins in it, but that would probably be kind of boring. Or you could describe it as being a makeshift sleeping area with personal trinkets and half-eaten meals that are still warm, and crude drawings that depict a large armored figure that the goblins seem to be worshipping. And suddenly this random monster room isn't just a monster room. There's actually a story that's being told here. We've played a lot of second edition type of games within our gaming group, and it's really exciting when you step into these places that give you this concept of what the monsters might actually be doing or what their own culture is like. In fact, in older editions, you could recruit some of these monster types to be hirelings that would follow you around. And so if you knew information about, let's say, the goblins worshipped a particular armored figure, you might try to become that armored figure so that the goblin you run across will worship you and follow you. The point being is that the environment should give you some clues and spark curiosity from the players. If they walk into a lab that has beakers on the wall with vials and whatnot of different colors, that should give a different story than if they walk into a room with shattered armor and scorch marks along the wall. So a practical tip that I want to give you is that whenever you have them going into an encounter space or you're developing an encounter space, ask yourself these three questions. 1, what happened here before the players arrived? 2, how does this place reflect who controls it? And 3, what environmental element could players interact with during conflict? And as you're thinking about these environments, don't just think visually. Describe the sounds. Maybe you have distant dripping water, or grinding machinery, or an eerie silence when players are expecting a noise. Add smells to the environment. Maybe you have the musty scent of old parchment, or the metallic tang of blood, or the sulfurous reek of a demonic presence. And you can also describe the lighting, which makes a huge difference when you're moving throughout a dungeon, and it's going to change the way that players approach a space. Are they stumbling through pitch darkness? Is there an unnatural blue glow from strange crystals on the walls? Does the sunlight stream through a collapsed ceiling in some area, which creates a single spotlight in an otherwise gloomy chamber? These details really help you provide an ambiance and a better idea of what's happening within a dungeon, and it might actually hint to what type of monsters or what big bad evil guys exist within that space. Okay, so now I want to give you some tangible things that you can do to break the mold and provide a scenario or a situation or an experience that is outside of combat. Because let's be honest, if you go into every room of your dungeon and you're just saying roll initiative, that gets really boring really quick. Combat is great, but there's a variety of things that keep dungeons really interesting. So I want you to think about challenges that target different character abilities when you're doing this. Your fighter might love combat, sure, but what challenges are there for your wizard and his intelligence, or your bard and their charisma? So here's some alternatives to standard combat. First off is puzzles, and puzzles do not have to be complex. In fact, just having a guard at a door that needs to hear the answer to a specific riddle, or having a arrangement of levers that have to be pulled in a specific order can be rather effective. You just want to make sure that the solution to whatever puzzle you put out there is discoverable through exploration and clues rather than relying on specific skill checks. Then you have social encounters, which work great in dungeons. We once had a damsel in distress that was tied to a wall in one of the dungeons, and the players spent like 20 minutes interrogating her and then debating over whether they should release her, and then they had to solve a puzzle to free her, just to later find out that she was a demon. She was released, and then combat kind of ensued after that. But in that moment, the charisma-based characters really shined, and they even got the hints that this lady couldn't be trusted, and they tried to convince the rest of the party, but they didn't believe them. So having a social encounter like that can be really effective too. Next is time-sensitive challenges, which can add a lot of pressure to the party, and we actually like to play with this a lot, especially in regards to short rests. If you take too many short rests, there might be a domino effect within the game where there are consequences that the party now has to deal with that they could have avoided if they had just pushed forward. So for instance, you might have prisoners that you know are going to be sacrificed at midnight. You could also have a time-sensitive challenge where you step into a room and the ceiling starts to descend, and so now they're just really racing against the clock. And this kind of leads us into resource management challenges as well, which we like to play with in regards to, do you have enough food, in regards to rations or water to get yourself through the dungeon? You might have a safe room where you can rest and recuperate, but it is going to eat away at your resources, and that can add some additional challenges. In fact, we oftentimes combine some challenges like this. So there's time-sensitive challenges and resource management. So if you are, using that safe room to rest, there's a good possibility that the enemy is going to reinforce their numbers or even send out patrols, and so you might have to contend with that. Whatever challenge you design, you want to make sure that it aligns with the narrative. So the example of the necromancer works because it fits with his character, it fits with his ambitions, it does make sense with the environment, with the temple that we have set up for him. I'm not just throwing in some random challenge to be difficult for the players, and this leads us into the conversation of really just having good player choice and agency. You don't want to just railroad them and put them into difficult situations that don't really make any sense with what's going on. And the choices that they make in the dungeon should matter. They should lead to whatever it is that's going on later on, whether they're fighting the big bad evil guy or they're going into a secret room or whatever happens. You want to also think about having multiple approaches to the challenges that you are presenting to them. So if you have this chasm for them to cross, maybe there's a precarious bridge that they have to get across, or maybe there's vines hanging from the ceiling that they have to swing across, whatever the case is, or even like a narrow ledge. Sorry, my mind's roaming with ideas. A narrow ledge that they have to get across. Whatever it is, having different routes that favor different types of characters within the party to give them different options can be a lot of fun, and then you're not really railroading them and forcing them through a challenge that is going to hurt their character in some way. I like to think that it is best practice for a dungeon master to provide multiple ways to overcome a challenge, but it can be difficult for us to think of all those different options. So I do sometimes throw in random things within a particular room so that players can use their own imagination and their own ingenious to overcome challenges that I throw at them, and I'm usually pretty impressed with some of the ideas that they come up with, which earns them inspiration points. But I think that this is a good rule to use throughout the dungeon in making sure that you have multiple paths, not just for those challenges, but also to navigate around the dungeon. If they make a lot of noise defeating one monster group and they have a pretty good idea that that's going to attract other monsters that might set up an ambush, maybe have them have an alternative path to get around that and maybe attack them from behind. Using that type of process and working through the dungeon can be really exciting for players because now they have an environment that they are somewhat taking control of and manipulating and finding solutions for. That gives them a lot of agency within the game instead of just barreling through door to door and kicking it down and fighting the next monster group and rolling initiative. After listening to me talk about this, you might be thinking that dungeons sound way too complex, but dungeons aren't really about complexity. There's really just 4 core principles that you're looking at doing here. 1, you want to use the environment to tell your story and create an atmosphere that reflects the narrative that has been happening throughout the entirety of the game. 2, you want to vary your challenges so that there are different types that engage different types of characters and the skills that they built with their character. 3, design multiple solutions or paths throughout the dungeon. And 4, make sure that there's consequences that acknowledge the decisions that the players have made. If they decide to go running across the narrow bridge that is across the lava and they slip and fall, they might take some heat damage. Alright, that is what I have for you guys today in regards to creating a dungeon. It's more than just about the monsters. Have it be fun, have it be interactive, and listen to your players. Listen to what they're kind of holding on to. Watch their nonverbals and see what is exciting for them and what they're frustrated by, and try to respond to that on the spot. Let me know what dungeons you have sent your characters into or your player characters into and what challenges you provided for them. And in the meantime, of course, go subscribe to our Patreon where we have resources for game masters like you. We'll talk to you next time.
Dungeon Brew.